Hello, I'd like to start by thanking Cosmia Festival for inviting me to discuss my research and for putting together a wonderful online literary event. My name is Jade Hinchliffe. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Hull. My thesis examines the portrayal of surveillance and inequality in 21st century dystopian fiction. In my research, I analyse contemporary dystopian novels from the global north and global south which discuss surveillance, and I examine what they can tell us about our world today. In this short video, I'm going to start by talking about the field of surveillance studies and recommend some reading for those interested in researching or teaching surveillance. Then I'm going to discuss some key differences between 20th century and 21st century surveillance practices and how this is portrayed in 20th century and 21st century dystopian fiction. Finally, for the remainder of the talk, I'm going to discuss some recurring themes I've noted in contemporary dystopian fiction, and I will recommend some novels to check out. For over 20 years, many researchers have studied surveillance, but up until the last 5 years or so, most of this scholarship was in criminology and sociology. Now, there are researchers in many different areas, including literature. The Routledge Handbook of Surveillance Studies, edited by Kirsty Ball, Kevin Haggerty and David Lyon, provides a comprehensive overview of different theories and the important issues in this field. Likewise, Surveillance Studies A Reader, edited by Torin Monaghan and David Murakami Wood, provides a sophisticated snapshot of the key areas in surveillance studies from the last 20 years, including arts and humanities research. I would recommend that anyone who wants to learn more about this subject or to teach this subject starts with these two books. The free online peer-reviewed journal Surveillance and Society is also a fantastic resource. To date, however, there has only been one book published on surveillance and the dystopian genre, Peter Marx's Imagining Surveillance, Utopian and Dystopian Literature and Film, although there's also been articles and book chapters published on this subject. Peter Marx's book is a foundational text and a key resource for my research. Brave New World, 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale are 20th century dystopian classics that have become cultural touchstones. Even if you haven't read these novels, you will likely have heard of quotes from the novels, know of Big Brother, and be familiar with the handmaid's costume. These are three of my favourite dystopian novels, and they have influenced our shared perception of what surveillance is, as well as the language of surveillance. The reason why I have decided to focus on 21st century novels from the global north and global south rather than these classics is for three main reasons. Firstly, Peter Marx's book does a tremendous job at discussing the 20th century classics, and these novels have been analysed and quoted again and again by surveillance researchers. Secondly, surveillance technology, surveillance practices, and the culture of surveillance has changed so much in the last 20 years. These classic novels discuss how surveillance operates in enclosed spaces, such as the workplace, the school, the hospital, or the prison, but today we are monitored everywhere on the go. The Hulu TV adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale has updated the novel and shows people using smartphones and referencing Amazon and social media in the time before. And the new TV adaptation of Brave New World on Sky has updated the novel. But the novels themselves do not discuss smartphones, social media, etc., because these had not been invented. So it makes sense to read 21st century novels to get a clearer idea of how surveillance operates today. Finally, everyone in the field of surveillance studies recognises the importance of discussing surveillance in relation to different countries around the globe, and they recognise that surveillance is not the same everywhere. Likewise, science fiction and speculative fiction are global genres, and we have seen a global trend in non-Anglophone sci-fi and spec novels being translated into English and being very successful. Many of these novels are dystopian, and they discuss surveillance because surveillance is an important part of our everyday lives, and because this genre is concerned with power, control, and human rights. So whilst I do not want us to stop talking about Huxley's, Orwell's and Atwood's novels, I think it's important and enriching to bring in new voices and new perspectives. Bearing this in mind, I am sceptical about the way that Dave Edgar's The Circle is being categorised by some surveillance scholars as the dystopian novel to read about the 21st century. I do think that this novel will become, if it hasn't already, a classic, and it is one of my all-time favourite novels. This novel discusses the influence of social media, big data, large corporations like Google and Amazon, as well as Silicon Valley, on us as a species. If you're not too afraid after watching the Netflix documentary The Social Dilemma, you should read this novel. It's an important, urgent novel which I highly recommend. But having said this, it's problematic for surveillance researchers to just focus on Edgar's novel and let it overshadow the many other brilliant novels which discuss contemporary surveillance. So I'm going to recommend some other dystopian novels and themes I've come across in my research that discuss surveillance. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, I had chosen to write a thesis chapter on healthcare surveillance, as I noticed that this was a recurring theme in many dystopian novels. This no doubt will become a major subgenre of dystopian fiction given the current circumstances. Last year, I also published an article which is free to read online called Health, Happiness and the Post-Human, an exploration of biometrics, biopolitics and the body in Julie's The Method and Nicola Barker's Happy. The selection of novels I recommend if you're interested in this subject are as follows: Julie's The Method, Nicola Barker's Happy, Gary Steingart's Super Sad True Love Story, Lauren Butz's Moxieland, Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, and Claire Wade's The Choice. Feminist dystopian fiction is also very popular at the moment. This is in part due to a growing fear that women's rights are under threat, and it is also in part due to the popularity of the Handmaid's Tale novel and TV adaptation. Unsurprisingly, many of these novels discuss gender in relation to surveillance. I recommend reading the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood's The Testaments, as well as Christina Dalcher's Vox, Lenny Zumas's Red Clocks, Maggie Shen King's An Excess Mail, Sophie Mackintosh's Blue Ticket, and Joyce Carol Oates' Hazards of Time Travel. Another topic I'm writing about in my thesis in relation to surveillance is migration, refugees and citizenship rights. The two novels I'm discussing are Sabrina Vervouleus's Ink and Mohsin Hamed's Exit West. Global warming and pollution are two major themes in contemporary literature more generally, and in apocalyptic fiction in particular. Two novels I recommend are Chen Kuvan's Waste Tide and Prayag Akbar's Layla. I also recommend Hayo Jingfan's short story Fooled in Beijing, which is available in the anthology Invisible Planets. Recently, I've come across three novels by British authors which can be categorised as both crime and detective fiction and dystopian fiction. These are China Miéville's The City in the City and Jem Tugwell's I Me series, which includes Proximity and No Signal. Chinese sci-fi and spec fiction is experiencing a boom. As well as the novels I've already mentioned, I recommend the two anthologies of short stories and articles on genre theory, Invisible Planets and Broken Stars. These anthologies are edited and translated by Ken Liu, who also translated Waste Tide. Finally, I would like to recommend several Indian dystopian fiction novels which have been published in 2020. These are Samit Basu's Chosen Spirits, Gautam Bhattia's The Wall, and Lavanya Lakshminarayan's Analog Virtual and Other Simulations of Your Future. Prayag Akbar's Layla was published in 2017 and it's the most famous example of Indian dystopian fiction. Layla has also been adapted into a Netflix series. I'm confident that Indian dystopian fiction is currently experiencing the beginnings of a boom and could become as popular as Chinese sci-fi and speculative fiction. Thank you very much for listening to my talk. If you have any questions or recommendations for me, I'd love to hear from you, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of Cosmia 2020.